Welcome in. Happy Monday. It's In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you as always. Hope you had yourself a wonderful weekend. The Hoosiers are 8-0 in football. Indiana men's basketball gets off to a good start with their exhibition result last night against Tennessee on the road. So the good vibes continuing in Bloomington. A lot of stuff to talk about today, I feel like. Of course, football being 8-0, tying their best start of all time from 1967. Had a great conversation with Mitchell Paige, as always, that we will get to in a little bit. But, man, is this ride ever fun for Indiana football? And maybe I'm underselling it, but just talking about it being fun. Because this is something that, I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. This is not something any of us had ever imagined seeing with Indiana football. I think we all had a pretty good idea that with Curt Cignetti, Indiana football was going to improve, and possibly in a very drastic way like it has. But I don't think anyone expected it to happen so fast in year one, where many of us have said this a million times, where, you know what, if they can get to a bowl game in year one, then that just shows that this guy really is the real deal in winning that bowl game. Well, that is long gone in the past, my friend. This team is unbeaten going into the first week of November, or I guess the first weekend of November, I should say, when we get to the Michigan State game this Saturday. But nobody saw this coming. I mean, the diehards could dream about it, as myself. I know we talked about it a bunch in the preseason, the potential to get off to a hell of a start. But I feel like even myself, I wouldn't ever go past the Nebraska game. I would usually just kind of stop there and be like, you know what? If they get to that point, we'll talk about, what to do moving forward. Well, you know what? We are at that point, my friends. We are at that point. The college football playoff is in play. A Big Ten title game appearance is in play. I mean, in unbeaten regular season, it's in play. All of these things, the only time you could do this in the past was in a video game. The only time this was ever possible in the past was whenever you would play NCAA football, choose your year, right? 2014, or even the brand new one, NCAA 25. The only time you could ever take Indiana to an unbeaten season was in a fictional setting on an electronic video game box, whatever you want to call it, console. But now this is real. This is where we're at. Indiana football is, I don't want to call them a national powerhouse. It's nearly what came out of my mouth. But they are a force to be reckoned with this season. And in terms of, I mean, if we're talking about national powerhouse this season, I mean, they are, even though the AP poll doesn't show it, they're still only number 13 in the AP poll. Everything else indicates that this team can compete with anybody that is on the field with them. And that is a very exciting thing to watch. College game day was in town. And before we get into some of the other things, I do want to mention, I know I talked about this last week. I did not watch the game live on Saturday. And that was something that I was able to keep up with the score, but not being able to see all of the action as it was happening. It was something I was missing out on, of course, but it did make rewatching the game on Sunday yesterday a lot less stressful and maybe not as rewarding because I already knew the outcome, of course, but it was still fun to watch knowing you knew what was going to happen. I was fully aware of the incredible pick six that D'Angelo Pons made at the beginning of the game to get the crowd really rolling. And I saw the shot of, the camera shot that Big Ten Network got of the D'Angelo Pons interception, and bravo to whoever was behind that camera, because you see them slowly pan outward to the massive crowd that was there in Memorial Stadium. And I haven't even looked up if it was a record. I'm sure it was. I don't know if it was. I know last week with Nebraska was the 4th all time. I've really been kind of off social media for most of the last few days. And of course, I'll get back into the rhythm with that. If, maybe I don't like to make any promises with that because, as I think I've mentioned before, not the biggest fan of social media at times. So it's usually where I find all of my, fun little stats that I like to throw out. Like, for example, here's one that I did see. This is kind of like this is a fact it's not a full fact. It's like a at least fact. So I'll go ahead and read this to you. Some of you may have already seen this, but Indiana is evidently the first team to start 8-0 without trailing in a game for a single second in at least 20 years. Which, when you say at least 20 years, I guess maybe they just don't have enough data to confirm. Maybe they have like data hit and miss for certain teams, but that is incredible. I mean, 2004, I was 7 years old the last time. And I wish I saw which team that would have been that was to go through 8 games without trailing for a single second. But I think a lot of people fail to recognize that when they're thinking about this Indiana team. The number one thing that always gets brought up with Indiana football for this season, if you're not somebody who is around the program or talking about the program on a regular basis, the number one thing that people keep bringing up is, well, they haven't played anybody. They haven't played anyone. They haven't. The best team on their schedule was the team they just faced, or maybe it was Nebraska or something like that. And there is truth to it, but that can't be the only thing that you mention. Why don't you look at the statistics that show that they're one of the best offensive teams in the country and one of the top 15 or 20 defenses in the country, I believe, as well. But again, I guess it doesn't matter what stat you throw at them, people will continue to say, well, there's no reason I'm going to believe in this Indiana team until they beat one of the traditional powerhouses, right? Like the Ohio States. And honestly, here's the other thing. When they face Michigan in 2 weeks, they probably won't get any credit for that just because this is not the national championship caliber Michigan. The only win left on their schedule, if they get it, that will get respect universally is the road win at Ohio State. It's the only one that people won't look at and say, oh, well, there is an added level of almost said nonsense, but just there won't be an excuse at that point, in my opinion. Maybe somebody will find their way to say, well, this isn't that good of an Ohio State team. And I will say this Ohio State team is a lot more beatable than they have been in the past, especially, I mean, when you look at what happened against Nebraska at home this past weekend. And I don't want to talk too much more about all this stuff because, about specifics of Indiana football, because of course, don't want to waste the conversation I had with our man, Mitchell Paige, but it's just so exciting. It's so fun to talk about. So we'll get into more of that here in a little bit with Mitchell. Mentioned College Game Day. You had Lee Corso. This was College Game Day done proper in Bloomington with, they mentioned at the very beginning of the show that they came to Bloomington in 2017 for the opening of the season on a Thursday. That was not the real game day treatment. That was game day being in town, and it was literally just the crew, if I'm not mistaken. It wasn't a typical game day environment or a show. They didn't have the crowd there. It wasn't the same thing. This was the first time they did game day proper in Bloomington, and everything about it delivered. They got to fully honor Lee Corso, did a deep dive onto him and his time with Indiana and getting to reconnect with old friends, players, coaches, that type of stuff. That was fun's not the best word to use for that. That was a really cool part of the show that they did to honor Lee Corso. And they saw Taven Jackson's dad. He was the guy holding up the Washington State flag, I believe, that makes an appearance on every edition of College Game Day. So that was cool. They had the kicker that was apparently a replacement. They had somebody who was, and when I say the kicker, for those who didn't watch College Game Day, they always do a field goal challenge where they bring in, I guess, a student. I think it's usually a student that they have come kick or attempt to kick a ball through some uprights to win a certain amount of money. Well, they had some guy come up and do it who was kind of the backup, I think. They mentioned that the guy who was supposed to do it got injured, tore his ACL or something. I don't know if they were joking when they said that or not, but they mentioned that whoever was supposed to do it couldn't. And the guy who came in to do it for him shanked both of his attempts. It was kind of funny. And Pat McAfee did a heck of a job really just making fun of him, but not being a complete a-hole about it at the same time. So cool. College Game Day. I watched that on Saturday night. So I watched the game on Sunday, And then Saturday night going into Sunday, I watched it. I mean, it was into the overnight hours. I decided to watch College Game Day because once I knew the result, I was like, okay, I'm going to find time to sit down and watch this later tonight just because I wanted to enjoy it. I hated that I couldn't be a part of the, all of the live stuff that was going on. And speaking of live things, real quick, I had this go through my mind a few times already. And I did thank this person previously on our other post-game wrap-up show from last night for basketball, but I do want to do it again. Mr. Drew Rosenberg, a big thank you for all that he did the last couple of weekends for me when I could not do the football post-game wrap-up shows. Appreciate him and Kyler for 2 weeks ago. And, of course, Drew and Dylan this past Saturday for taking care of things for me while I was out there. Big shout out to them. They do not have to do that. They do that because they also care about the product as well. They didn't want to just leave it high and dry and not do a football post-game show. But hopefully I won't be missing an action for any more of those. And I did just mention the basketball post-game show. If you missed any of that last night, feel free to check it out on Hoosier Illustrated's YouTube page. Myself and Kyler Staley, we reacted to all that went down with the basketball game between Indiana and Tennessee. And I guess I'll go ahead and talk about that for a few minutes before we fully go back into football mode with Mitchell Paige. But I'll tell you what, it was weird, first of all, turning on a college basketball game and it still being October. It felt like I was, using a cheat code, right? Like to get access to something that normally you don't have access to. It was on the SEC Network Plus, and thankfully, because I have some sort of ESPN Plus subscription with my Hulu account, I was able to watch it. And so turning that on and just seeing Indiana playing in not just an exhibition game, but it was against an opponent that is believed to be a really good, team coming into the season. Number 12 Tennessee versus number 17 Indiana. And while it wasn't pretty, really in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it was the first televised piece of action that you got with Indiana basketball against another opponent, or against somebody other than themselves, of course. But it wasn't what people. I mean, I don't want to say what people weren't expecting or were expecting, but I think a lot of people have been the biggest concern I think fans have with Mike Woodson going into year 4 is, will they be able to shoot the 3 ball? Will they play faster? Will this be a high-powered offense? And you really didn't get that last night. But I also, if you go back, if you go back and watch the post-game wrap-up show with me and Kyler, you'll get the full kind of our raw reaction to it, just because it was immediately after the game. But there's a lot of, I don't want to say question marks. It's just so hard to evaluate an exhibition game. I'll say that. And that's also evident if you've already seen last night's post-game wrap-up show. There was a point during that recording where I was kind of at a loss for words, just because, and I wasn't angry about anything. I wasn't upset. I was very pleased with the result overall, because going down and winning in a road environment like Knoxville, Tennessee is tough to do, whether that team is good or not. And that is supposed to be a good Tennessee team. But I felt like I was just a broken record. And I didn't want to be that way, because it was literally a small sample size in an exhibition environment where you don't want to overreact to everything that you're seeing. And I think the biggest takeaway from the game last night is just the fact that this team was competitive. I mean, they got the win, first of all. They looked the part when it comes to, they belonging on the same floor. There was a lot of time. I mean, Tennessee, it felt like, was in control of the game for longer than Indiana was, right? Indiana was in control at the right time, being towards the end of the game, and really at the beginning of the game as well, the beginning and the end. Everything in between, though, it felt like Tennessee kind of was just dragging Indiana along, and that may not be the best way to describe it, but Indiana just kept, anytime Indiana would cut Tennessee's lead in half or whatever, from 4-2, and Tennessee never had a really, really big lead at any point during the game. But anytime Indiana would come close to taking back over, Tennessee always had an answer. But when it really mattered, Indiana pulled through, and they showed some real signs of, is grit the right word to use here? They showed that they're going to be capable in games like this throughout the season. I think that's the best way to say it, because early on in the year, outside of the battle for Atlantis, the South Carolina game even, there's not a lot of opportunity outside of the Big Ten schedule where you're going to learn a ton about your team, at least when it comes to against elite talent. But seeing them play against Tennessee, it gives you a glimpse at what to expect when they do play the South Carolinas, whenever they do play in the battle for Atlantis. And that's mainly, I guess, what we're talking about specifically, because yeah, South Carolina is a good team, and, at least from the power conference, I don't know how good they're actually going to be when it comes to the grand scheme of things, but it will be a game against a power 4 opponent, power 5 opponent, if you include the Big East, in Assembly Hall. So that will be a challenge, comparatively speaking to the rest, when you have SIU, Edwardsville, Eastern Illinois, those types of games. But you're going to face more teams like a Tennessee when it comes to the battle for Atlantis. When you face Louisville, of course, and then really in your second game, if you beat Louisville and Gonzaga wins, you'll face the Bulldogs, who are, I believe, the number 6 team AP team in the country starting off the season. So that number will likely fluctuate in some way, shape, or form before Indiana faces Gonzaga. But I think it's safe to say, even though we probably already expected this already without seeing anything on the floor, it is now more safe than previously expected to think that this Indiana team should be competitive with some of the better teams in college basketball. Now, do we really know what that elite tier looks like yet? I mean, outside of UConn, and I guess you could throw Kansas in there. I don't know that I'm willing to do that, honestly, because I feel like, as I mentioned before, that they're just getting the brand bump because they're Kansas. They can still be good, but I think UConn, until they're dethroned, and I'm not even just talking about from their national championship, until they show more vulnerability than they have in the last couple of years, I think they're without a doubt the best team in college basketball, and they should be treated as such for the season as well, I believe. So UConn is the current standard. Whether or not this team, I'm talking about UConn's team, will be of the same ability as the last two, we will have to wait and see. But right now, you can't expect otherwise, right? Because Dan Hurley has found a formula that works for him and works in this era of college basketball. And that is what every other team, program is striving to do. And this might be a weird comparison, but I think it fits. I think Signetti with Indiana football has found a formula that works for the Power 4 level. And again, I know it's is this comparing apples to oranges? Maybe, because Dan Hurley's won national titles 2 years in a row, and Indiana hasn't really had the chance to do that just yet. They definitely have more of a chance to do so than previously, but Signetti has done something that a lot of coaches have not figured out, and that's how to piece together a team quickly whenever, and not that UConn was down, the way that Indiana was with football, but everybody in the country wants to know, how has Signetti been able to do this? And the same thing on the basketball side of things. How has Dan Hurley been able to do something that hadn't been done in college basketball since Florida did it in was 07, 08? So a lot of interesting things. I guess the big picture, we were talking basketball, right? I mean, we're talking Indiana basketball. I don't know how we ended up. Oh yeah, we were talking about being competitive with the elite of the elite. So we don't really know how good the elite level of teams are yet this year. And so I guess the standard is, will UConn continue to dominate the way that they had the last couple of years? Because if that ends up being the case, we'll have to wait and see if Indiana plays an opponent of that style, of that high caliber. So yeah, there's my thoughts on basketball. If you want kind of the full breakdown on the whole game, and you want to get better analysis from someone like Kyler Staley, who I'll definitely give him credit when it comes to basketball. Maybe I shouldn't even admit this on the air. Sometimes I feel it. Kyler, if you're watching this, sometimes I feel intimidated whenever I'm talking basketball with you. Maybe that's why I got a little antsy last night during the postgame show, because I feel like you really know your stuff, and not that I don't. It's just the ego in me bothering me, right? So shout out to our man Kyler Staley for helping me out during the post-game show last night. I was feeling rusty too. I hadn't done post-game wrap-up shows in a while, but I'm looking forward to doing plenty more of them in the near future. I believe we're going to try and do one this Friday for the Marion exhibition as well. I'll keep you guys up to date if we end up doing that one. But of course, football post-game shows this Saturday, Michigan State on the road. We'll talk more about that as the week goes on. Talk a little bit about it with Mitchell Paige as well. But it. One thing I'll say, and you'll hear me reiterate this here shortly, so I don't want to start sounding like a broken record, but it is still the game that scares me the most, this Michigan State game on the road for the remainder of the season, even more so than Ohio State. So we'll go ahead and move forward. Bring on Mitchell Paige here on In Touch with Indiana Sports. And then on the other side, we'll do what we've been doing. We'll talk about the updated CFP projections because, again, we are that much closer to, seeing what the college football playoff rankings look like, what that bracket would legitimately look like with an Indiana team. And it becomes more and more real the more that Indiana continues to win. And then my betting weekend, I guess I'll go and throw this out here now because there's not a lot to mention. Bad betting weekend for me all around. Didn't bet on the NFL, mainly just because my college football betting was not up to snuff at all this weekend. I don't know if I had a single game hit, and I was very confident in a lot of my picks. Navy completely crapped the bed against Notre Dame. Ohio State, of course, did not cover against Nebraska. Illinois did not cover 21.5 against Oregon. What else do we have? I don't have them right in front of me. But, just long story short, bad betting weekend. So if you faded me, maybe you cashed in. If you followed me, maybe you'll never follow my bets again. But we're going to keep trying because it's fun. I enjoy it. And it does add a little intrigue to some more of the games outside of my genuine rooting interest when it comes to Indiana. So without further ado, Mitchell Paige, formerly of Indiana football, talking all things Hoosiers. Joining us once again here on a Monday on In Touch with Indiana Sports is, of course, the one, the only Mitchell Paige, former Indiana football wide receiver, here to talk once again about the undefeated Indiana Hoosiers, now 8-0, still at number 13 in the AP poll, but the AP poll is about to be obsolete for those like myself who have been, tracking how well Indiana is going to jump up in those rankings. It's about ready to be college football playoff rankings time. I don't know if it's this week or next week, but it's coming up. Anyway, let's talk to our man Mitch, who of course was at the game once again. He's been at every game at home except for the FIU opener. Mm-hmm. He was there for game day. He was getting down and dirty with the crowd, I'm sure. So Mitchell, go ahead and I want to hear your opening thoughts first on just getting there. What was your game day experience like for being in Bloomington this past weekend?
Yeah, I got spoiled is what happened this weekend. Usually I'm about the cheapest guy you can imagine, so we'd always park in the Poplar Garage and then walk the 2.5 miles that it takes to get to the stadium. This week we had a parking pass.
Oh, did you now?
For one of the parking lots, like 500 feet from the entrance. We got there at 6 a.m, had our little fire going. I've been spoiled. I don't know how much those cost, but those will be in my possession next week or next year, probably.
So you got there super early. What was the tailgate like at 6 a.m. with a fire?
We were the first ones in the lot.
Wow.
It was honestly a really cool. We were probably the only ones there for like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And then it started filling in fast. There were a bunch of other people coming early. I think I've said this every week, but if you have not been to a game, John, we were talking about this pre-game, or pre-podcast. If you haven't been, find a way to get to Bloomington. You got 2 chances left. There's just something about the air there right now. There's a little bit of magic. You've
been saying that too since probably week 3, maybe. You've been talking about the magic in Bloomington for a while. I'm starting to really believe in it.
There is something. I don't know what it is. There's something. It's you feel like untouchable when you're there. And then the team comes out and just rolls people, which just adds to the aura that is Bloomington right now. It's a crazy, I can't even explain it. They're so good. They can beat you in every way. I don't know. We talked about it, I think, last week, but there's a lot of teams that I've watched this year that are supposed to be pretty good. I don't know. So
with sticking with the early morning hours, did you Did you decide to get into the thick of things with the college game day crowd since you were there so early?
I tried. There were thousands of kids already there. When we walked over at 6:45, there was still, I mean, it looked like a full set of people. So I walked over there, but I never got very close because it was packed.
How do you feel that Bloomington has handled having a lot of people at the football stadium consistently now? Because I heard a couple of Nebraska fans, you could probably guess which ones. It's really just one Nebraska fan and a Purdue fan. And they talked about some parking or traffic issues in Bloomington. Do you feel like they've rectified that, or is that just people angry about Indiana football?
There's always been traffic, and there's just a little bit more traffic. There's 60,000 people, probably more, on a bunch of single lane roads. Like, there's no way to rectify it. I don't care if you have everyone going one direction and you got to loop it. There's no way. It didn't matter if it was before or after. Like, there's just a bunch of people around. It's fine. I had no problem even when I was parking where I was parking before. It was a lot easier with the parking pass. But yeah, I think they've done a fine job. There's bathrooms everywhere. Now the lines are pretty long because there's so many people, but if you think that it's a bad experience going to Indiana, I can't help you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think
I really hope that I'm able to make it up there for one of the two remaining home games. And I don't even know at this point in time which one is more likely. I'd love to see them face either one. I think Indiana's going. Honestly, here's what I'm saying. I think Indiana's biggest chance to lose, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, is this weekend. And it's not because I think Michigan State is that much better than Indiana. I don't think they're better than Indiana at all. But to me, it's just the fact that it's week 10, technically week 9 for Indiana because they've had a bye week, and they haven't been in a real road environment. And I have no reason to think that Michigan State won't show out against a team that is as good as Indiana. Maybe I'm already diving into this now since I've already brought it, so we can go ahead and go down this path if need be. But it's definitely going to be something we haven't seen any part of this Indiana team face, whether it be Taven Jackson or Curtis Rourke, who ends up taking the snaps this coming Saturday. It's going to be a unique environment. And I do think Cignetti will have them prepared. I do think it was helpful that they finally had a little bit of real adversity this past weekend against Washington. And when I say real adversity, I know they still haven't trailed, but Indiana, it took them a while to really put away this Washington team. And when you had the way that this team finished the first half, where they couldn't get across the goal line, 4th and inches, whatever it was, 3rd and inches, it felt like it would have been a guaranteed touchdown. You end up settling for a field goal, and then you follow that up by throwing an interception on the first play or second play of the first drive of the third quarter, and Washington goes down and scores to make it a 3-point game. That's probably, you could correct me if I'm wrong, Mitchell, the most adversity that this Indiana team has faced all season long, and they responded in a big way.
Yeah, it was definitely the most adversity. I may be different than other people. I never felt like we were in trouble, though. They moved the ball really well, Washington. I think they're pretty good on offense. But for some reason, man, these guys, they're stingy. They make plays when they need to. Indiana on defense, and they do just enough on offense. They just pounded Washington to a pulp for 4 quarters, and eventually you're just going to break when you're getting 6, 7, 8 yards a pop running the ball with a quarterback that really had I thought, harder time finding his rhythm. I thought he played fine. He just never got into his kind of flow that allows you to really get explosive, but they stayed on schedule. It never still felt like the game was in doubt. But you are right. I think Michigan State losing to Michigan maybe helps Indiana a little bit because the crowd may not be as
and I agree. I
excitable.
was worried if they were to beat Michigan, them feeling juiced coming into the
Right.
Indiana game. I mean, they'll be juiced anyway, but having that extra oomph after you beat your in-state rival with Michigan.
Yeah, they put up a heck of a fight against Michigan. Now it might be a little bit of a pillow fight between the two teams because I think Michigan
It's
stinks.
cheeks.
Dude, they stink. But they're still physical, and it's a rivalry game where anything can happen. I think Michigan State's a little tougher than people want to give them credit for. Their record maybe doesn't show it, but I agree. I think outside of this past weekend in Washington, this is a game I look at on the schedule where it's like, ooh, I don't know. I don't know quite how I feel about that one yet. I think having Curtis Rourke back, a 6-year guy that just feels like he's in total command all the time, is really going to help. Cross your fingers that he's going to be back. But even with Taven Jackson, I think that Indiana is going to be able to control the tempo, and control the physicality, control the line of scrimmage really effectively, and kind of do what they just did to Washington, where maybe it takes a little bit longer, but eventually you just lean on them long enough that you make enough plays, defense makes enough plays, and I don't think Michigan State's offense is near as potent as Washington. I thought that quarterback played great. So I think that if it's a Taven Jackson type game, I think it's another one where you just lean on them and kind of suck the air out of the game over the course of 4 quarters.
You know, one thing that the announcers kept mentioning on Saturday is that Washington has, even though they're only 4-4, well, they were 4-3 before the game, they were 4-4 after the game. They have outgained every single one of their opponents, which is a very interesting stat to not have a better record. And they actually did the same thing this past weekend against Indiana, which I don't know if I would have guessed that. And it was barely. It was 318 yards to 312. And they did do a good job at kind of making the Indiana offense, I don't want to say try to be more creative, because I don't really think Indiana did a whole lot of things creatively when it comes to the offense. But what they did do well was just manage what they were able to do. I think one thing that this Indiana team does better than maybe any team in the country is just knowing what they're good at and playing to their strengths and not trying to do too much to try to just do it because it's the flashy play. You didn't see Taven Jackson do anything that was truly out of the ordinary for him this week. And I think that really goes to show how well Kurt Cignetti coaches this team into making sure that they know exactly what they're supposed to do. Even if they're in situations that maybe aren't favorable, they're not going to do anything dumb to put themselves in position to make a stupid mistake. Even the interception they had, it wasn't a stupid mistake. It was just a really hard thrown ball that really you could have thrown PI at it if you wanted to.
You could have. How could you not? He was there a second and a half early.
It's almost like the fact, I think the play happened so fast that the officials didn't realize that they could have called PI on it.
I mean, he's standing right there. I know
the fact was, again, we don't need to talk too much about the non-call, but I think the ball was thrown so quickly at whoever the receiver was at the time that by the time it bounced off of, I don't know if it was his helmet or whatever it was, they weren't even thinking about the fact that the Washington defender kind of ransacked him before the ball even was able to get to him.
I don't know how you don't think about that. How do you get a bounce? Like, you think that he just punched the ball backwards?
I'll say this. I did watch, and you're aware of this, Mitchell. I watched the game yesterday, so I didn't have to watch it with all of the stress of what the hell is going to happen. So I wasn't angry when I saw the play. So maybe not having that emotion toward it is why I'm talking differently about it.
I wasn't angry. It just was stunning. Like, there's a middle judge, a back judge that's standing 5 yards from it. There's a side judge that's standing 8 yards from it. There's referees everywhere. How can no one see this? And I think that's been kind of a universal theme in college football. Some of how these guys have jobs as referees is stunning. And I'm not saying this group is a part of it, but I think it's more of just a kind of a pandemic in college football. So when that kind of stuff happens to you, you just kind of take it and, all right, let's move on. This is what the game is. Don't have robot refs yet.
Not quite like the I guess it's the ML. Is it the MLB? They don't use robot umps, but they do. They use some sort of
zone or whatever.
Yeah, the robot strike zone.
Yeah.
That's odd. Let's talk some big picture stuff, and we've been slowly diving more and more into this. I feel like as the weeks have gone on, this team is now 8-0. They have tied their best start of all time in 1967 when they went to the Rose Bowl. All it takes is one more win, and you're officially. I mean, can we go ahead and say that? Because it was the 60s, do you think that this is, no matter where they finish, right, Mitchell,
Yes.
do you think this is the best Indiana football team of all time? It may sound ridiculous to make that statement, but when you know how many bad football teams Indiana has, I don't think it's as difficult to declare that as some may think.
Yeah. I mean, they went to the Rose Bowl. It's awesome. Great. I'd have a hard time believing there's a team in history that beats this one.
Yeah.
Just they're multiple, they're balanced, they're physical. And sure, I'm sure that 19, this is no disrespect to those guys. They've done the coolest thing in program history, but not for long, I would imagine.
Yeah.
I would imagine that we will not be talking about the 67 team as much as we do because everything that they did is about to be outdone, is my guess.
Yeah. Again, one win away from 9-0, and who I was gonna say who really knows what the ceiling is. I think we know what the ceiling is. It's just a matter of will they get it done. This team absolutely has the ability to get to the Big Ten championship game. They absolutely have the ability to be in that first 12-team college football playoff. And I think they have the ability to knock off elite teams. I know it feels like the only people left that are regularly doubting Indiana are those. It's not necessarily those who haven't watched Indiana, but it's those who regularly watch, the Ohio States, the Oregons, the Alabamas, those who are always at the top of college football. They're just waiting to see Indiana compete against one of those guys before they fully buy into whether or not this team can do it. And I tend to fall into like, I don't want to necessarily say I believe everything that they say, but being kind of I'm definitely a positive person, like half glass full when it comes to outlook on my team, usually, even when things aren't going well. But there's always that creeping doubt on will they be able to put together the type of performance that we've seen when they do play those that do have the elite talent. And I do think Indiana is a part of the elite teams. It's just a matter of can they go toe to toe with those guys when the pressure's really on. I think they would be able to. But again, I mean, we're going to see that here in the next few weeks. They got Ohio State coming up. I mean, even though Michigan's having a bad season, or by their standards, not having a very good season, they still have all the talent in the world to where if you do beat them to a pulp, I think that would be. I mean, that should definitely be, again, another indicator that this team is on a different level compared to most. But you'd still see people doubting. I don't even really know what it would take. I guess maybe winning the conference for people to stop thinking this team is just benefiting from an easy schedule. I know I'm kind of going on and on here, and I've mentioned multiple things. So I'll let you shut me up, Mitchell. But I just wanted to mention all that stuff.
Yeah, I think I have two things. I have two answers to this. One is more the reality of the situation. I'm on Twitter a lot, and even am getting people saying they've never played anybody. They haven't. Those people are morons. You don't understand anything about football. You don't understand college football. You don't understand how much talent are on any of these teams, right? Western Illinois and Indiana, there's a big talent gap. Washington and really anyone else, UCLA and really anyone else. I mean, you watch what UCLA started doing. They went to LSU, who most people think we're going to win the SEC, until they go to Texas A&M and barely lose in one of the toughest environments in the country. UCLA had them on the ropes. Indiana beat the brakes off them. So if you don't understand how this all works, then you can continue to doubt Indiana. If you've watched them for 1 second and you watch how they beat people, you understand that there is absolutely a chance that Indiana is as good or better as any team from any conference that they could play for the rest of the season. That's just the reality. I don't care what conference they come from. I don't care what it says on the side of their helmet. Indiana is as efficient and effective in every phase as any team in America currently. That's just the reality. If you want to say no, you're a moron, but fine. The reason that I say fine, I kind of like it. I think Signetti and the boys kind of thrive on how stupid people are to continue to doubt how good they are. And I'm starting to feel real good about Columbus, even. Not even
and a
this
lot of it,
weekend, Michigan. Those ones feel kind of like stepping stones, just kind of kick them out of the way. And thankfully, I'm sitting here and not in the locker room. I'm sure they won't treat those games that way, but just kind of see you later, guys. Thanks for playing.
Here's the way I look at the Ohio State game now, too. Not only did they struggle with Nebraska this past weekend, and I do think Nebraska is better than what they did against Indiana. I do think a lot of that is because of how good Indiana is.
Yes.
But here's why I like the way the Ohio State game set up. There's a couple different things. Believe it or not, I kind of like that this is a road game right now. At the beginning of the season, I didn't, because people would chalk it up as an automatic loss or something that you should lose. But Ohio State right now is already feeling the pressure because of the way that their fan base is. And Indiana basketball is the same way as it, by the way. Because of the pressure that Ohio State has to perform and live up to these expectations, I don't see them playing loose against a potentially undefeated Indiana team that, again, I don't want to say they have nothing to lose, because at this point you do have something to lose. But again, you're playing with that chip on your shoulder that everybody doubts you. You're going into the shoe. People think you don't have a chance. Ohio State's going to be expected to perform well against an Indiana team because they're perceived to have this superior talent to everybody else in the Big Ten. And that's one reason why I like, with this current situation, I know I feel like we're getting way ahead of ourselves right now. We still have to watch them play Michigan State and Michigan, but it is fun to talk about what could happen because we are potentially going to get there eventually. But I think that tends to favor Indiana because Ohio State already has a loss. They lose again, they're not going to the Big Ten championship. They may be able to sneak into the college football playoff depending on what happens
just because of their
in other conferences.
That's it. Just because of their helmet.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the only reason.
So they're going to be feeling, I mean, Indiana can afford to lose and probably still they can get in the Big Ten title game with a loss potentially and make the college football playoff with a loss. And
if Ohio State beats Penn State, Indiana is driving the Ferrari to the Big Ten championship. Yeah. That's just the reality. It's just the reality. There are two undefeated teams left in the Big Ten, Oregon and Indiana. And I don't think
unbeaten. Penn State would still be.
That's what I said. If Ohio State beats Penn State this coming weekend,
I thought you said the other way around. I got you.
I may have said the other way around. What I meant is Ohio State beats Penn State, driver's seat. Driver's seat.
But again, though, then there's still that very weird scenario where you could have. Actually, I talked about this with Jeffrey the Greek last week, where you have a big tiebreaker and you're 11-1 or whatever. But here's the silver lining with this I didn't think about. There's almost a benefit to being on the outside looking in with that tiebreaker and not playing in the Big Ten championship, because you probably get a not as good seed in the 12-team playoff, but you get to rest your guys if you have anybody who's hurt that needs to fully recover. And you're still, I don't see any one-loss team from a power conference missing out on the playoff, even if you do miss your conference title game. So there's almost, a good, you don't want to miss the Big Ten championship, but there is some benefit potentially if there is a tiebreaker scenario and you're 11-1 and you get to sit out an extra week before the playoff.
Yeah, I would argue that if you get to the Big Ten championship, even with one loss, you'll probably host that first weekend. And you still got to win. If you win the Big Ten championship, obviously that's best case scenario. You don't even have to play the first weekend. But if you miss out on the Big Ten championship, you're probably going to someone that's pretty good in the most insane environment that stadium's ever seen.
Yeah.
Because you have to, whatever home field advantage a team has on a weekly basis during the season, multiply it by 100 with this on the line. We've never seen anything like this. So you have to factor in, there's the 12th man. This might be the 13th, 14th, 15th. Like it is going to be a different world. I think you need to do everything you can to find a way in there so you can be the one hosting at worst.
I've made the we'll find out whether or not this ends up raining true or not, but I feel like these first round college football playoff games are going to give off similar vibes to the opening weekend of the NCAA tournament. And I know those games aren't played in home environments, but the chaos that ensues with those types of games, and I'm not saying that you're going to see road teams upsetting the home team a lot, but just the environment is going to be similar to that of a NCAA tournament type of a game for basketball, just because it feels like there's so much more on the line when you get to that. And again, we've never experienced it with a 12-team playoff, so it'll be brand new, but it feels like it's just going to bring that type of energy when you get to that point.
For sure. I think it's in my head, it's the AFC NFC championship games. That's what's in my head. It's home. There's a chance to go to the Super Bowl, especially if Indiana's hosting. I can't even imagine what that place is going to be. They might have to build an upper deck just to house all the people. But yeah, you can't underestimate how important it is to have that at your place if you're going to have it. I think it's because football is so much different than basketball. Basketball, you can make some threes and kind of keep yourself in it. In football, you got to deal with the front seven in the offensive line. That's why you don't see those big upsets very often, because the big people usually win, and all the big people are at the big schools. So, yeah, Boise State beat Oklahoma however many years ago. That was awesome. They've played great against Oregon, but Oregon eventually wins. Boise State looks awesome this year. They're going to have to beat somebody that's bigger, faster, and stronger. Now they got a great back, but at their place, you're going to have to go in there and win. And it's the same thing in basketball where, yeah, it doesn't happen very often, that 12-5 kind of upset, but it's at least once a year. And I think football is just so much harder because it's so much more physical to get an upset like that.
Yeah.
So you need to have it at your house, I think. Which is crazy that we're even talking about this.
Yeah, and again, that's why I keep as you are speaking on this segment. For some reason today, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, like, what are we accomplishing? I feel like my fear is that we're 2 weeks down the road and we're like, we're a bunch of morons. We've lost 2 in a row. What were we thinking? I don't want to think like that. That is the previous Indiana football mentality that has been instilled in us because we have been taught that we are the bottom of the barrel. And I don't mean to say we. I know I'm just a fan. I guess Indiana in general is a bottom of the barrel program. They should not be here. And then that's what I'm trying to get to escape my mind, because this is not that. This is Curt Cignetti's Indiana, and it's something that's totally different. I hope it lasts a long time. That is also something that continues to worry me, is that somebody, and this is going to happen regardless. I just hope that the Indiana administration is prepared to counter whatever any other big time program throws at him, because he's going to have bag after bag after bag thrown at him if he hasn't had it happen already. It would not surprise me in the slightest if those down at the University of Florida or at programs similar have already talked to him personally about doing something after the season. And I think, again, just based on the way that Cignetti carries himself, I don't think he would humor it right now. Maybe he would talk with him after the fact. But you know that the big time programs want this guy. There's not a program in the country that would turn down a Cignetti at this point. And then we'll wrap this up after this. I know we're going pretty long, but I did want to bring that up at least once.
For sure. It's hard to win. It's almost unbelievable what he's doing right now. And not almost. It just is. And there's Maggie in the background. Say hello.
Shout out to Maggie Paige.
It's really hard to just do this week in and week out and create this in what seems like 5 minutes juggernaut team that just rolls over everybody. And there's going to be other schools that maybe don't have better budgets. I think one of the most what people don't know the most about Indiana football is how much money there is. Can you hear her?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
She's fired up this morning.
She is fired up. She's still unbeaten too, by the way.
She is unbeaten. She's 16-0. People don't understand how much money there is in the football program for upgrades, for players, for coaches. In the last year and a half, the influx of cash into the program, I don't think people really understand or can comprehend. Now, can we match the biggest of the big, the Texas A&M type offer to Mike Elko? Probably not. But neither can anyone else. And if that's what drives Cignetti, I wish him the best. I think what Indiana fans can kind of sleep well at night knowing that, one, he's 63, going to be 64. He's got all his buddies with him at Indiana, all the coaches he's been with forever. His wife loves it, as he continues to talk about. And he's still kind of in the process of building something, right? Like there's potential to turn Indiana into a year in, year out kind of juggernaut with what's in place. With what's in place. She's talkative. And he kind of strikes me as someone that may want to see that through, because he turned JMU into that in FCS, was on his way in the FBS, but it's not in the biggest conference. Now you're at a place like Indiana that's in the biggest conference. You can turn the thing around, which he seems to love to do, and you can also do it on the biggest stage imaginable in college football. With all the things that are going to be changing over the next couple of years, if you're not in the Big Ten or the SEC, kind of feels like, sorry about you. They seem to be running the world, and he's got a spot there, and with a fan base that would literally die for him. So,
and that's the thing, Cignetti. I don't think anyone at this point, honestly, unless they get fired, no head coach is leaving either the Big Ten or the SEC for the Big 12, ACC, or any other conference at that point. You're either going to stay within conference or jump to the other major power. And of course, in this scenario would be the SEC. So we'll have to wait, and that's a bridge we'll have to talk about or cross and talk about after the season, potentially. Who knows? And there's plenty of other angles we can look at once we get to that point in the season. But for now, we're going to continue to enjoy it. We are going to, hope that this ride continues on, and, the stakes continue to get higher and higher. Again, they're going for their best start in school history against Michigan State. They're battling for the spittoon once again, the first of 2 trophy games for the regular season. This used to feel like the pinnacle of what Indiana was playing for. Get your trophies back, the spittoon and the old oaken bucket, and that was it. Now it just feels like, I don't want to call it an afterthought, but, it's just different. They're playing for something more. So
I will tell you, there's nothing like going and getting that trophy back.
The spittoon or any
trophy, just running and getting it back that's a different feeling. Yeah. Even if it's on your sideline, whatever it is, like after the game, I know probably no one else in the country cares about those 2 trophies, but it's a different kind of feeling when you have that. I bet the boys are fired up today. I guess that they're going to have a pretty good week of practice, because the rivalry games, they do matter, especially inside the building.
That'll be interesting to see. I always think of Ralph Green when I think of the spittoon, by the way.
How can you not? That big picture of him holding it up.
Yeah.
Spitting in it. Disgusting.
Indiana football icon, of course. Iconic picture.
Disgusting.
All right, Mitchell, I've kept you way too long, but I know you've enjoyed it, so I do appreciate it. And I hope we get to keep having fun conversations. I know I say this at the end of each segment every week, but again, like you said, it feels like magic. I don't want the magic to disappear. I'm enjoying it, and I hope it stays around for a long time coming.
Keep it going forever. It's the best year of my life.
As always, thank you to Mitchell Paige for his time, especially the extended time today here on a Monday edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports. All right. Something we've been doing, I guess, as a Monday tradition the last several weeks, and that's taking a look at the college football playoff projections by some of the ESPN analysts, experts, hooligans, whatever you want to refer to them as. And I believe this is the very first week that every single analyst listed on here, I think there's maybe 10 or 12 of them, something along those lines. I haven't counted them. But we're going to go over a few of them. I've chosen 3 that I'm going to take a look at. Just because they're different in some way, shape, or form. And we'll take a look at what that bracket would look like if this were indeed the college football playoff, the way it's going to end up being. So, first of all, shout out to Eli Lederman. He is the last ESPN analyst to finally believe in Indiana in some way, shape, or form. He does not have them ranked very high when it comes to the top 12, but he has finally inserted Indiana into his top 12 for the college football playoff. I'm sure he didn't like doing it. Yeah, I don't even know Eli, but he's definitely the toughest to crack when it comes to believing that Indiana can get it done. And maybe he ends up proving us all wrong, and maybe he ends up being the one that says, I told you so, this Indiana team wasn't as legit. But again, we've already talked about that enough today. And I'm tired of having that sort of mindset. Let's just enjoy this right now while we have it, because maybe we won't have this forever, correct? As Indiana fans. So let's take a look. And we are going to start with Eli, Lederman, Letterman, whatever your name is. He's got Indiana slotted in as an 11 seed in his first edition of the college football playoff projections, where he includes the Hoosiers. And as the 11 seed, you do face off on the road against the 6 seed, which in this case would be Ohio State. What a unfortunate thing you would potentially have to do in that scenario, visit the Horseshoe for the second time in just a matter of a few weeks, if that were to be Indiana's route into the college football playoff. That's definitely not really a fun way to look at it. It's just kind of like, okay, maybe you've already beaten Ohio State. And if that's the case, you probably aren't an 11 seed. This is probably assuming that Indiana does in fact take a loss and doesn't participate in the Big Ten championship. And if that's the case, maybe this does end up being the scenario that plays out, because, I mean, you wouldn't want to play Ohio State twice, especially at home again for them. But that'd be an interesting scenario. And if you were to win that game, you advance to play the 3 seed, which in Eli's case would be the currently undefeated Miami Hurricanes, Mitchell Paige's secondary team, his first love, if you will. So, I'll tell you what, even though he's probably not rooting for this, I want to see an Indiana-Miami playoff matchup, whether it be in a campus game or in one of the bowl games. It would definitely be something that would be cool to experience and hear his thoughts on, just the mental jousting of who to root for. And I think he would end up rooting for Indiana in the long run, just because of the ties he has to it now, and of course being a part of that program. But it is interesting to think about a potential Miami-Indiana matchup. But moving over to, let's go to Bill Connolly. He was the opposite of Eli. He was the very first analyst to believe in Indiana and put him in his playoff projections. Was it maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago at this point? He currently has them slotted in at number 6, which would be the opposite of where they just were at 11, at least when it comes to, they would be the home team in this scenario, and they'd face off against another currently undefeated team, which is the Pittsburgh Panthers from the ACC. And I think that would be a favorable matchup for Indiana. I think outside of Miami, I would take Indiana against pretty much every other team in the ACC. I don't know, maybe Clemson too. Clemson's kind of found their rhythm, and of course they are a program that is very well respected. They are used to having success, especially under Dabo Swinney. It hasn't been up to the snuff that it was at during the early days of the college football playoff, just because he hasn't really utilized the transfer portal as much as some other programs have, i.e. Indiana. But they've still had relative success, and they're definitely having a better year this year, other than their horrible loss to Georgia to open up the season. They've bounced back in a big way, and they may find themselves back in the college football playoff. But anyway, what I was saying, other than Miami and I guess Clemson, Pittsburgh's not really a team that frightens me as an Indiana fan. And maybe they end up not being in the college football playoff. But if you end up getting to host a team like Pittsburgh, that's definitely one of the better case scenarios you could have for a first round game, before you would then go on to play once again the 3 seed, which in Bill Connolly's case would be the Georgia Bulldogs. Once you get to any of those second round games, you're probably going to be in a fight that is a lot more difficult than your potential opening round matchup against whoever that may be. So Georgia would be, there would probably be a lot of people who just write off Indiana in that game, just because not only are you facing an SEC opponent, and for some reason the national guys love to just assume that the SEC reigns supreme no matter who they're facing, but it would be an SEC team that is known for winning national championships going up against an Indiana team that is known for being absolute cheeks most of the time, with the exception of this year and then a couple of years in the past. This is a different level than what we even saw in 2019 and 2020 even. Some could say it's on the same level just because there was college football playoff consideration in play, and that team had a higher AP ranking at their peak than this team has hit yet, which I don't know. You know what it was? Back in 2020, Indiana football had beaten a lot of teams that were in the top 25 that ended up kind of sucking whenever things were all said and done. Michigan wasn't very good. Penn State wasn't very good. Wisconsin was below average. Those were all ranked wins for Indiana. But again, you also have the COVID factor with all that stuff too. That's how they got a much higher AP ranking than this Indiana team has seen, just because the schedule sets up a little bit differently. So we'll see what ends up happening. Of course, nobody would pick them to beat Georgia. I'm most certain on that, but it doesn't mean it can't happen. And then let's go to one more. This is the highest Indiana is placed on any of these top 12s, and this is courtesy of Kyle Bonagura. I hope I said his name correctly. Has them as a 5 seed, which makes them just outside the automatic buys that go to the conference winners. And I'm assuming that would mean that they go to the Big Ten championship and lose, and it looks like they would have them losing to Oregon. And so that would have them placed at the 5 line. And with that 5, you face the 12 seed, which is the G5 auto qualifier. When I say the auto qualifier, it automatically goes to a G5 team, the highest ranked G5 team or conference champion, I guess you could say, which in this case would be Boise State. You'd be going up against Ashton Jeanty. Get to test your defense against one of the most outstanding running backs that college football has seen in a long time. And how much of that has to do with them being in the Mountain West, who knows? You could say the same thing about Indiana, their schedule, right? It's kind of the same type of mindset. Is he as good as the numbers show? I think he's really good. And it would be great to see Boise State in a playoff scenario, as long as they don't beat Indiana, of course. That would be a crying shame. But it would be great to see. And Indiana would be hosting them in this scenario. You won't have to play on that crazy blue field up in Idaho, although that would be pretty unique to see as well. And, just a very good, the best case scenario, right? If you're not one of the buys, the best case scenario is to play the G5 champion and then move on to play the lowest ranked conference champion, which in this case would be BYU, formerly of the G5. Now, again, I don't want to act like that makes them lesser than the others, even though I'm kind of making it sound that way. But if BYU ends up being the Big 12 champion, I mean, if they're unbeaten, that's one thing. But, I mean, some are even saying right now that Colorado might have a chance at being the Big 12 champion, which is just bananas to even think about that, considering where they were last year and where how Deion Sanders has always carried himself. And just, again, that's not what we're talking about anyway right now. It's just what popped into my head. But you getting to play BYU in a bowl game, again, it's probably the best case scenario. You get to play the worst conference or power conference champion in this scenario before you make the semifinals potentially at that point. So fun to take a look at these as always. And if you want to check out and again, I'm not trying to give ESPN a free plug as if they need it from me or from anyone for that matter, but CFP, they update these CFP projections every Monday or Sunday, something like that. And there's a whole list of people that have, their top 12 and where they have Indiana slotted. And it's kind of cool to plug and play where each of these analysts slots Indiana and seeing where they end up being. And soon, I know I mentioned last week, I thought it might be this week that the college football playoff rankings get revealed. And now I'm starting to think it's next week, but I don't know that for sure. I'll try to confirm that. I guess you say before tomorrow or before Wednesday, but I do believe they used to do them on Tuesdays. So if that were the case, then it would happen before next show. So if they end up having the college football playoff rankings, then we'll react to them on Wednesday, talk about where they have Indiana slotted. And I will say this, when they do come out, if it is this week, I think you would see them placed higher than you see them currently in the AP poll. I think the college football playoff committee will have more respect for Indiana for whatever reason. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but we'll have to wait and see when that time comes around. With that being said, let's go and wrap up today's show. Appreciate you joining me once again on a Monday. Check out everything going on HoosierIllustrated.com. As always, subscribe to us on YouTube, especially now that we're getting into crossover season. A lot of football and basketball things going on. Plenty of post-game wrap-up shows for both football and basketball, of course. And we'll have you covered for all things when it comes to football and basketball, and even some of the non-revenues. We'll do our non-revenue shout-outs on Wednesday, as always. So until then, this has been an wow. I don't even want to cut that out. But let's try that again. Until Wednesday, this has been another episode of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.